Raul, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Nathan.
So some people don't know that you were a church planner.
That's right.
Years ago, you started a church. It's still going today. Still, I think you told me last time it's feeding hundreds of people a month or something.
That's right.
Down there.
Still today, 26 years later.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Let's talk to church planners a little bit. There's people right now that are feeling that call. You remember when you felt that call, right? Like, this is just what I have to do. But I think there's a lot of church planners that are looking at the circumstances right now and saying, wow, the stock market's up and down. What about another coronavirus? What about this or that? Should I really start a church now? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's so interesting that historically, God has never called people only when times are good.
That's right.
Right? And
That's right.
in my opinion, when you look at biblical history, it's always during Israel's worst time that God would bring up somebody who would be a voice of hope. And it's always been during American history, during some of our worst times, that we've seen the greatest revivals. And we're seeing right now a point in our history, at least in our modern history, in which there are more people suffering today as a result of all of the political tensions, the coronavirus, and financial tensions now that have brought people to a place of suffering. And there's never been a better time to start a church because hurting people always look for answers. So today's the day to start a church.
The hopeless time is the time when hope makes the most sense, right?
That's correct.
That's the message we need to hear. Now, when people are launching into that, how did you work through instability? Because when you planted a church, when I planted a church, there's always seasons of instability.
That's right.
What does a church planner need to do to create their own stability in the midst of chaos?
Yeah, one of the areas of when I look at stability that I think about is what I say. We're living in a time in history in which what the Christian message brings to us, while thousands of people will hear the message of hope, there are groups of people that will classify that as hate speech.
Right.
And they'll look for ways to sue, and you'll do an altar call and you'll lay hands on people, and 100 people are blessed and their lives are changed, and one person says, I don't like what happened at the altar call. I fell, I did whatever, and they will try to sue the church, or they will say that they felt that they were mentally abused because the message brought them pain and suffering. So what we have to do is listen to the words of Jesus when he sent out the 12, and in another instance when he sent out the 72, he told them to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. But what was so interesting is the following verse said, they will try to bring you before tribunals. What is that today? Before the court. The number one most common problem that churches face today is a litigious society, right? But that doesn't mean we quit, because God always protects and qualifies those that he calls, but he also gives us the tools that we need to take the right steps. And that's why, here at StartCHURCH, that's what we work on every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is protect the call that God's put on your heart.
Yeah.
And I think there's never been a better time to start a church, but do it the right way.
So what would that right way be when you're thinking of, because I hear you say a couple things. One, I hear you say, hey, circumstances are never going to be perfect. There's never going to be God up there saying, oh, well, everything's perfect. Let's go ahead and start churches. And vice versa. He's not there saying, things are a little chaotic right now. Let's hold the church planting thing. You're saying, even in the midst of circumstances that are unstable, still do it,
That's right.
Still get it. And now you're also talking about take steps to protect that. What are some of those steps? So somebody, new church planners out there, would-be church planners, what are steps they need to take to protect this investment, if you will?
Well, one of the great things about American jurisprudence is that we are able to create organizations that are separate from us on a personal level.
And corporations.
So, that's right, corporations. As a body of believers, the church will always be that body, right? The individuals, but we're allowed to create a separate entity that is completely separate from us as ministers and the congregation, so that everything and anything said in a service or at board meetings or what have you, or decisions made, aren't decisions that you make at a personal level. They're decisions made by an entity, which separates you from that entity. So that's called limited liability protection, or it's also known as the corporate veil, designed to protect what we say as believers, and so long as we know that we're being responsible and we're preaching sincerely. And many times there are churches that may preach something that I may not agree with.
Sure.
But I understand that the First Amendment is there to protect them too.
Yeah.
But it won't protect us if we don't take the right measures of incorporating a church, getting a tax ID number. That's so simple, because once you establish and get that tax ID number, you now have a number that's used for tax purposes for the church, separate from your own Social Security number as well.
So incorporating, walking through the process, what are the steps to that? If somebody's thinking about doing that, I love something you said real quickly. You said that it's separate from the people. Quick Bible study lesson. Just because you incorporate doesn't mean you're incorporating the church. The church is the ecclesia, right? The called out ones, the spiritual family, if you will. That spiritual family chooses to start a corporation to really manage its assets and have limited legal liability, as you said. If somebody's sitting out there and says, yeah, that makes sense to me, what kind of steps or what kind of processes do they need to go through to get that corporation going?
And to get the corporation, it depends on the state that you live in. So you file what are called articles of incorporation. And in those articles of incorporation, especially through our Start Right program, churches that use our program, they'll have a large number of different methods and ways of to be able to set up their corporation and language that they want to use in their corporation, such as an ordination program, the 501c3 language being included as well. But once you create articles of incorporation, then the state says a new entity has been born.
It's kind of like a birth certificate for the organizational side.
That is exactly right. So once that's there, then everything done through that corporation is separate from the individuals in there. A lot of times people they sincerely mistake the idea that being incorporated means that now the body of Christ is subject to Caesar.
Right.
But that's really based on a misunderstanding of what a corporation really is.
Right.
We have money that we manage. People gave oftentimes I would hear this being told to me, that's sweat equity.
Yeah.
That's sweat money. People work hard for their tithes and their offerings and they bring it. So how do we manage it in a way that's responsible?
Sure.
Well, we create a corporation. The corporation keeps record. It's got books. It keeps accounting so that every penny can be accounted for.
Right.
And that's separate from the body of Christ, which is the ecclesia.